She'll never make the cut, Captain. Look at her -5'4", maybe 120 pounds soaking wet. Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison's voice carried across the briefing tent as he gestured dismissively toward the communications equipment. This isn't a job for someone who looks like she belongs in a college dorm room. The other operators chuckled, their eyes scanning Sergeant Sarah Mitchell with the kind of casual assessment that reduced her to measurements and assumptions. She stood at attention beside her gear, jaw set, watching Morrison demonstrate what he called real operator standards. By hefting a 40-pound radio pack like it was a feather, Sarah's fingers traced the edge of her tactical vest. Feeling the familiar weight of equipment she'd carried through more classified operations than any of them knew, her pale green eyes remained fixed on the mission briefing board, absorbing every detail of the Syrian desert compound they'd be infiltrating at 2 o'clock hours. While Morrison continued his performance, she mentally calculated signal propagation, patterns, backup frequency protocols, and emergency extraction procedures. The desert heat pressed against the tent walls, but her mind was already 3 steps ahead, running through contingencies that could mean the difference between mission success and body bags. I mean, seriously, Morrison continued, his audience now including Captain Reynolds and the other 5 team members. When things go sideways out there, we need operators who can carry their weight. This is the kind of mission where one weak link gets everyone killed. He tapped the briefing board with his tactical pen, pointing to the compound's defensive positions. These ISIS fighters don't care about diversity quotas. They'll target the weakest member first. The tent fell silent except for the distant hum of generators and the soft whisper of sand against canvas. Sarah felt every eye in the room, measuring Morrison's words, calculating her worth in pounds and inches rather than the classified operations. File locked away in her personnel records. Before we continue this incredible story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to follow our channel and hit that like button for more stories of underestimated heroes who proved everyone wrong. The mission parameters were brutal in their simplicity. Infiltrate a fortified ISIS communications hub, extract intelligence on planned attacks against U.S. bases, and disappear into the desert before dawn. Sarah checked her encrypted radio one final time, its familiar weight settling against her hip like an old friend. Morrison was still talking, out contingency plans that assumed she'd be dead weight the moment bullets started flying. What he didn't know was that her slender frame had carried wounded soldiers through 3 miles of Afghan mountains, that her weak arms had maintained radio contact while hanging upside down from a crashed helicopter in Iraq, and that the quiet confidence in her pale green eyes came from operations so classified that even their mission commander didn't have clearance to know about them. The desert stretched endlessly under the filled sky as the team moved through the pre-dawn darkness, their night vision goggles painting the landscape in ghostly green. Sarah maintained her position in the formation, her footsteps silent on the hard-packed sand, while Morrison's occasional glances back carried the weight of someone waiting for her to stumble. The compound loomed ahead, a collection of concrete buildings surrounded by razor wire and guard towers, its radio antennas reaching toward the sky like metal fingers. Intelligence indicated 12 to 15 fighters inside, armed with AK-47s and improvised explosive devices, their communications equipment vital to coordinating attacks across 3 countries. The team moved with practiced precision, each member knowing their role in the carefully orchestrated assault. Sarah's responsibility was maintaining communications with headquarters, coordinating air support if needed, and ensuring that extracted intelligence reached the right hands. Morrison had made it clear during final preparations that he expected her to stay back and work the radios while the real operators handled the dangerous work. She'd nodded respectfully, her expression giving nothing away, while internally cataloging every weakness in his tactical assumptions and every gap in his understanding of asymmetric warfare. As they approached the compound's perimeter, Sarah's trained eye caught details that Morrison's bravado had missed. The guard rotation patterns were irregular, suggesting either poor discipline or a deliberate deception. The radio antennas showed signs of recent modification, indicating possible signal intelligence capabilities that could detect their approach. Most critically, the defensive positions were arranged in a pattern she recognized from classified briefings, a signature of foreign military advisors who'd transformed this from a simple terrorist cell into something far more dangerous. She keyed her radio twice, the agreed-upon signal for all clear, while her mind raced through implications that could turn their surgical strike into a deadly trap. Morrison held up his fist, signaling a halt as they reached the breach point. Through her night vision, Sarah watched him survey the compound with the confidence of someone who'd never encountered an enemy that fought back with professional military tactics. The other team members spread into position, their movements efficient but lacking the subtle adjustments that came from experience with well-trained adversaries. Sarah remained in her assigned position, 30 meters back from the breach point, her radio ready and her eyes scanning the darkness for signs that their presence had been detected. The desert wind carried the faint sound of voices from inside the compound, too organized to calm for the chaos of a typical terrorist cell. The assault began with textbook precision. Flashbang grenades shattered the pre-dawn silence, followed by the controlled burst of automatic weapons fire as the team moved through the breach. Sarah monitored multiple radio frequencies simultaneously, maintaining contact with headquarters while tracking the team's progress through the compound's maze of buildings. Morrison's voice crackled through her earpiece, confident and commanding as he directed the clearing operation. Building 1 secure. Moving to the communications center. The mission was proceeding exactly as planned, which in Sarah's experience, meant they were about to encounter something that wasn't in the intelligence briefing. The first sign of trouble came through her radio. Intercept equipment, foreign military chatter on frequencies that shouldn't have existed in this sector. Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized the tactical communications patterns of Russian Spetsnaz advisors, their voices calm and professional as they coordinated a response to the American assault. This wasn't just an ISIS communications hub, it was a training facility for foreign special operations forces. And Morrison's team had just walked into a trap designed by people who knew exactly how American special operations teams fought. Contact. Contact. Morrison's voice exploded through her earpiece, no longer confident but sharp with surprise and growing panic. We've got professional fighters in here. These aren't terrorists, they're trained soldiers. The sound of automatic weapons fire intensified, punctuated by the distinctive crack of precision rifle shots from concealed positions. Sarah's radio crackled with urgent communications from the team members, their carefully planned assault dissolving into desperate defensive fighting as they encountered an enemy that matched their training and exceeded their expectations. Sarah moved without hesitation, her body responding to years of training that Morrison had never bothered to learn about. She abandoned her assigned position and sprinted toward the compound, her radio pack bouncing against her back as she covered the distance in 30 seconds that felt like an eternity. The sounds of battle grew louder, the sharp reports of M4 carbines mixing with the deeper bark of AK-74s and the whistle of rocket-propelled grenades. Through her earpiece, she could hear Morrison, trying to maintain control of a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond his tactical understanding. Base, this is Alpha Team. Morrison's voice was tight with stress as Sarah reached the compound's outer wall. We need immediate extraction. Repeat, immediate extraction. We're taking heavy casualties and need air support now. Sarah pressed herself against the concrete barrier, her trained ear analyzing the battle sounds from inside. The enemy was using classic Spetsnaz tactics, drawing the American team deeper into the compound before closing the trap. Morrison's conventional assault training had prepared him for fighting ISIS insurgents, not Russian special operations advisors who'd spent years studying American tactics. Sarah keyed her radio to a frequency that Morrison didn't know existed, her voice calm and professional despite the chaos erupting around her. Raven Base, this is Shadow 7. Authentication code Bravo Lima 64. I have a compromised team in contact with professional hostile forces. Request immediate tactical support package. The response came instantly, a familiar voice from operations that existed in the shadows between official military channels. Shadow 7, we have your position. Air support inbound, ETA 12 minutes. What's your assessment? Sarah closed her eyes, her mind calculating possibilities that could save Morrison's team from their own tactical blindness. Russian advisors using our own playbook against us. The team doesn't know what they're fighting. The compound had become a killing ground, its narrow corridors and defensive positions turned into a maze designed to trap and eliminate American special operations teams. Sarah moved through the breach point that Morrison's team had created, her steps silent despite the urgency driving her forward. Through her earpiece, she could hear the team's communications deteriorating from tactical coordination to desperate survival instincts. Morrison's voice had lost its commanding authority, replaced by the raw tension of someone realizing that his assumptions about warfare had just been shattered by an enemy that knew his tactics better than he did. Sarah's movement through the compound was nothing like Morrison's methodical assault, where his team had moved with textbook precision. She flowed through the shadows like smoke, her body language and tactical awareness shaped by operations that didn't exist in any manual. She avoided the main corridors, instead using maintenance shafts and utility spaces that insurgents typically ignored but professional soldiers would have secured. Her radio remained silent except for the encrypted communications with air support, her presence unknown to both the trapped American team and the Russian advisors who were systematically destroying Morrison's conventional assault. The communications center lay at the compound's heart, its electronic equipment still humming with the intercepted intelligence that had brought the team here. Sarah reached the building's exterior wall just as Morrison's voice crackled through her earpiece with the kind of desperation that preceded catastrophic failure. We're pinned down in Building 3. Jenkins is hit bad, Rodriguez isn't responding, and we've got professional marksmen in overwatch positions. The tactical situation was clear. Morrison's team was trapped in a building that had been designed as a kill zone, while enemy forces controlled the high ground and escape routes. Sarah made her choice with the kind of cold calculation that separated special operations legends from conventional soldiers. She activated her radio jamming equipment, cutting off the Russian advisor's ability to coordinate their assault, then switched to an emergency frequency that would reach Morrison directly. "Jake, this is Sarah. I'm at the communications center. You've got 12 seconds to get your team to the southwest corner of Building 3 before I bring down their overwatch positions." Morrison's response was immediate and incredulous. "Sarah, you're supposed to be at the rally point. This isn't your fight." "Jake." Sarah's voice carried an authority that Morrison had never heard before, calm and deadly serious. "In 10 seconds, you're going to understand why they call me Shadow 7. Move your team now, or explain to their families why you didn't." She didn't wait for his response. Instead, she moved to the communications center's entrance, her body language shifting from the careful movements of a communications specialist to the fluid precision of someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of close-quarters combat in places that didn't exist on any map. The locked door surrendered to her electronic lockpicks in 4 seconds, and Sarah disappeared into the building that Morrison's team had been ordered to avoid. The communications center erupted in controlled chaos as Sarah moved through its interior with the lethal efficiency of someone who'd been trained by the same people who'd trained the Russian advisors now hunting Morrison's team. Her suppressed rifle coughed twice, and 2 enemy fighters dropped without ever knowing they'd been engaged. She moved through the building like a shadow, her every step calculated to bring her closer to the overwatch positions that had Morrison's team pinned down. The Russian advisors had made one critical mistake. They'd assumed they were fighting a conventional American special operations team, not someone who'd learned unconventional warfare from the masters of the craft. Morrison's voice exploded through her earpiece as she reached the building's upper level. "Sarah, what the hell is happening?" The enemy fire just stopped. Through the windows, she could see Building 3 where Morrison's team was trapped, its southwest corner now clear of the crossfire that had been tearing them apart moments before. Sarah moved to the next overwatch position, her rifle tracking smoothly to acquire targets that had been systematically destroying American soldiers. "Jake, you've got 30 seconds to move your team to the extraction point. Air support is inbound, and this building is about to become very unhealthy." The final Russian advisor was a professional, his position carefully chosen and his fields of fire precisely calculated. But Sarah had spent 3 years learning close-quarters combat from instructors who'd written the manual on urban warfare, and she approached his position from an angle that existed only in classified training facilities. Her blade found its mark before he could turn his rifle toward Morrison's fleeing team, and the compound's deadly overwatch network finally went silent. Sarah keyed her radio to Morrison's frequency, her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Jake, building is clear. Your team has safe passage to extraction." Morrison's response came through labored breathing as his team moved toward safety. "Sarah, who the hell are you?" That wasn't communications specialist work. Above them, the distinctive sound of rotary aircraft approached, the air support that Sarah had summoned with frequencies and authentication codes that Morrison had never heard before. She made her way to the compound's exit, her mission complete but her identity still hidden behind the same quiet professionalism that had made Morrison dismiss her as just another support soldier. The extraction helicopters were touching down. Outside the compound, their crew chiefs already preparing for wounded that would need immediate medical attention. As Morrison's team reached the extraction point, Sarah appeared from the compound's shadows, her rifle secured and her radio equipment intact. Morrison stared at her with the kind of recognition that came from suddenly understanding that everything he'd assumed about warfare had just been proven wrong by someone he'd dismissed as too weak to fight. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying a respect that hadn't been there 12 hours earlier, "I need to know who you really are." She met his eyes with the same steady gaze that had watched him perform his earlier dismissal. But now, Morrison saw something different, the quiet confidence of someone who'd proven herself in fights that most soldiers never lived to describe. Extraction helicopter lifted off from the desert floor, carrying Morrison's team toward the safety of their forward operating base while Sarah sat quietly in the crew compartment, her radio equipment finally silent after hours of maintaining communications that had saved 7 lives. Morrison watched her from across the aircraft, his mind trying to reconcile the woman who'd just single-handedly neutralized a Russian special operations training facility with the soldier he'd dismissed as dead weight that morning. The other team members shared the same expression, professional soldiers, realizing they'd been working alongside someone whose capabilities existed in a completely different category. Captain Reynolds was waiting at the landing zone when the helicopter touched down, his expression serious as he approached Morrison's team. "Debrief in 1 hour," he announced, then turned to Sarah, with a nod that carried implications Morrison couldn't understand. Shadow 7. Colonel Martinez wants to see you immediately. Morrison's head snapped up at the designation. Shadow 7 wasn't a communications specialist callsign. It was a legend whispered in special operations communities. A ghost who'd reportedly saved entire units in operations that officially never happened. As Sarah gathered her equipment, Morrison finally found his voice. Sarah, I owe you an apology. And an explanation. I said things this morning that. She turned to face him, her pale green eyes carrying the same steady confidence they'd held throughout the morning's dismissal. But now Morrison understood what he'd been seeing. Jake, you were doing your job, assessing team capabilities. Based on available information, you just didn't have all the information. She shouldered her radio pack with the easy movement of someone who'd carried it through battles that would never appear in official records. But who are you really? Morrison asked, his voice carrying the respect of someone who'd just learned the difference between conventional special operations and the shadows that existed beyond. Official military channels. Sarah paused at the helicopter's edge, her expression thoughtful as she considered how much truth a conventional soldier could handle. My father was Master Sergeant William Mitchell, 1st Special Forces Operational killed in Somalia, 1993. My grandfather was Colonel James Mitchell, Military Assistance Command, Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, also killed in action. Classified location, 1971. Morrison's face went pale as he recognized the names. From special operations history, legends who'd fought in wars that officially didn't exist. Soldiers whose families often continued their service in ways that conventional military never acknowledged. My training began when I was 8 years old, Sarah continued, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone of someone describing a normal childhood. Marksmanship, close quarters, combat, unconventional warfare, and communication systems that most soldiers never see. I've been operational for 6 years, 13 countries, 43 missions that you'll never read about in any official report. As Sarah walked toward the debriefing facility, Morrison stood beside the helicopter, watching her disappear into the maze of tents and administrative buildings that made up their forward operating base. The woman he'd dismissed as too weak for special operations was actually part of a military legacy that stretched back through decades of classified operations. Her quiet professionalism hiding capabilities that existed in the shadows between official warfare and the kind of fighting that kept democracy alive in a dangerous world. Captain Reynolds approached Morrison, his expression understanding. Jake, she's been carrying that radio pack through operations that would terrify most special operations soldiers. The only reason she's assigned to communications is because that's her cover story. Morrison nodded slowly, his tactical worldview fundamentally altered by 12 hours of combat alongside someone whose existence challenged every assumption about strength, capability, and the true nature of American special operations. Tomorrow, he'd return to training soldiers, but he'd never again measure capability in pounds and inches. Some legends walked quietly among regular troops, carrying radio packs and accepting dismissive comments, until the moment when conventional warfare failed and someone needed to step into the shadows where America's real battles were fought. Sarah Mitchell was one of those legends, and Morrison would spend the rest of his career making sure no one else made his mistake of confusing silence with weakness.